just want to tell folks before we bring Cornel on a little bit. There he is. There's Dr. West.
Hey.
I want to tell him a little bit about how this incredible moment came to pass, because I think it's a story worth telling. First of all, I love this man, and have watched him for years and years and years and years and years, and watched him speak. And in particular, he was giving a message at in Seattle at the on his book Black Prophetic Fire, and he just tore me up because he was speaking about very powerful things, in particular about W.E.B. Du Bois and the 4 questions that he speaks about in The Souls of Black Folk. And I just was determined. I'd seen Dr. West in the audience at Birdland a few times, and I was always like, hey, it's Dr. Cornel West. You just can't just go up to him and speak, or yes, you can, I guess, but I'm kind of, some of you might know this, I'm kind of a little bit of a radical, and I am engaged in many different political associations, and I was asked to be on the host committee of a dialogue between Dr. West and Bob Avakian at Riverside Church, and the topic was revolution and faith, which we know Dr. West will address that, and as Dr. West was speaking, I literally saw musical shapes arise out of him and sounds, and I said, "Man, that's Albert Eiler. That's John Coltrane. That's a musician." And so I thought I would. I just got this idea that I wanted to write a concerto for him. And I started trying to get hold of Dr. West, and we spoke, and then I was invited to an anti-police brutality rally, and I met him, and we spoke on the same stage in Union Square. And then later on, I got to actually, I never told you this, Dr. West, but this is exactly what happened. So we later on, that rally was also held at a church, and you spoke so powerfully, I could hear people weeping. And I mean, every hair on my head stood up, and I'm just sitting there, kind of at the end of your speaking. There was this moment of silence where the MC said, "And now we'll have a word from Arturo O'Farrell." So, so I got up and spoke from my heart about the brutality of a racist society, the brutality of fascism, and the tyranny of so many injustices that we deal with in our lives. And I didn't know what I was doing then. I still don't know what I'm doing, but you came up to me and you said, "That was strong, Brother O'Farrell." And you said, "Come and sit with me." And I started gushing like a 12-year-old. I said, "Dr. West, I want to write a piece for you." And you were like, you were so generous. You said, "That's an incredible idea." And little did I know that huge future for us, for you, for me, for the nation to hear your voice was in store. And we got to write 4 questions. We got to record together. We got to perform it at Stanford. We got to perform it at the Apollo Theater. And the impact that you've made in my life is huge. And I will forever be grateful for your generosity. And so I welcome you on behalf of the Anti-Racist Action Committee at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music as our inaugural guest. And I'm so honored to call you my friend. Please, Dr. West.
Wow, my brother. Well, you know how much I love you and respect you, though, brother. You and your magnificent family and precious loved ones. And I must say that I just revel in your rich humanity. I salute your genius. The sense of just spending time with such a great artistic figure who's down to earth, that brings together so much genuine humility as well as a tenacity. You understand what your calling really is. That was one thing that we both recognize in each other, that we have a very distinctive kind of calling and vocation. And in some ways, it echoes that of one of the greatest of the great Beethoven, when he used to say, "Artists must look unflinchingly at the evil and still muster the courage to love beauty and create beautiful things." And you exemplify that in so many ways, though, brother. You really, really do. UCLA is so very blessed to have you. And I do want to acknowledge my dear sister Eileen, the Sister Dean Strempel, who is such a just a visionary leader. I was telling her, I got a chance to see one of her lectures at BU. It was just extraordinary, starting with the scholarship that she's done on women's composers and Marie Granville, and then connecting it to pedagogy, and most importantly, in her deep sense of humility and service to the professors and the students, trying to give of herself to empower others. So it's not just an abstract critique of inequality. That's a beautiful thing. But in the end, it's the quality of the persons that we attempt to be, and all of us fall short. But it's the quality, it's integrity, honesty, decency, a courage, a fortitude. Those are the things we need to talk about every time we talk. And, people used to say, you don't really want to, you need to really pick your conditions under which you talk about virtues and truth and justice. And what is that? Night and day. It's like a Babyface song. You know what I mean? Night and day. That's the only time you ought to talk about those, which is all the time. Very much so. And so, brother, I'll follow you off a cliff. When you call, I come running. That's just how we roll, my brother. I'm sorry I can't be at UCLA, in person. No, UCLA is such a special place, such a grand. I want to acknowledge Robin Kelly. Oh, Robin D.G. Kelly. To me, he's one of the greatest of the greatest intellectuals of not just his generation, but of our time in terms of bringing together courage and vision and magisterial scholarship. And he's one among others. I know UCLA's got a number of them, but he's one of my favorites. I've met him 30 years ago, and it still inspires me in such a profound manner.
Well, it's good to acknowledge Professor Cheryl Keyes, Shannon Redmond. The African American Studies Department here is strong.
Yes,
the School of Music is strong. The School of Global Jazz Studies, headed by Dr. Steve Losa. And I don't know if you know that we got a friend of yours here who just came on board last year. The great Terrence Blanchard is part of
Brother
our faculty.
Terrence.
Yes, he is here.
Oh, my God. He was kind enough to put me on so many of his albums.
Oh, I know.
And the others, Terrence is there. Y'all got him from New Orleans and New York and Los Angeles.
I believe so. I believe he's living in L.A.
Wait, I've heard he wrote this opera for Brother Charles Blow, Fire in the Bones.
Yeah.
No, Terrence. Oh, I love that brother.
We also have, we have a wonderful faculty, incredible musicians, incredible scholars, incredible people who just are connecting the dots. So we're on the verge of a lot of redesigning ourselves. We're hoping that you'll help us understand this moment in history and how institutions are going to change after this moment, and how especially we talk about curriculum a lot in UCLA. We talk a lot about the need to broaden our understanding of music and musical curriculum, especially in the School of Music. But in general, I wonder if you would comment to how do institutions deal with this moment in time in a way that's not necessarily reactive, but that has a long-range plan. What do we do? How do we change institutions? How do we change ourselves so that we don't allow this kind of moment again to ever take place in our lives? That would be something I'd love to hear your thoughts
on. No, I hear you though, brother. I want to salute Herb Alpert too for really on the vision to create this whole institutional matrix itself. And you're so kind in not mentioning the Grammy Award nomination that you got 2 of them, brother. I know you're so humble, but I'm gonna put it out there.
for the piece I wrote for you.
Well, that, but also the deep single that's on there. You got two Grammy. I know we won't get into that. We're not into titles and things, No. Sam Cooke never got a Grammy. Milli Vanilli got 2. So we always put these things in context.
And put these things in context. Thelonious Monk never got one either.
Exactly. So that the titles are simply, means towards something so much deeper. We want to be, in the language of John Coltrane, forces for real good. And your forces for real good, it means that you have decided to make certain kind of choices in your life. And you begin with the most fundamental question, which is the fundamental question of any university, which is, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human? And our English word human coming from the Latin humando, on our way to burial, on our way to burial. So what kinds of human beings will we be in the short move from mama's womb to tomb? And the first move there is, and you see this in Vico's New Science, the great philosopher from Italy, Naples. He says that we have our most intense moments of being alive when we're actually standing at the graves of our loved ones. So it begins with burials. And that reality is so overwhelming. The grief is so overwhelming that the response of moans and groans and guttural cries. And so it's really song before poetry, and then philosophy, and then science. So see, we've got universities that are preoccupied with STEM, and they're trying to make a little space for certain conceptions of literature, but the most basic, fundamental human responses to wrestling with the terrifying question of what it means to be human is actually moans and groans transfigured into noise and sound. And so from the very beginning, if you got this modern neoliberal university so tied to the market, so tied to the nation state, so bureaucratized, so specialized, that when it comes to all of our unique and singular experiences of being the kind of human creatures we are for the short time in time and space that we have, how will our students be able to ever be existentially, morally, spiritually, and then tied to scientifically and politically empowered? Politics in and of itself never does it. Science in and of itself never does it. They are inescapable, they are important, but if we don't get to the notion of what it means to be human, no matter what color, no matter what sexual orientation, no matter what national identity, no matter what gender, no matter what class. And so in that sense, you see, the musicians in a certain sense are in a very, very distinctive position. As you know, I believe musicians are the vanguard of the species, because they really are. Because, we are the kind of species where so much of our history is a history of domination, hatred, oppression, envy, insecurity, anxiety, fear. Now, what else do we have other than that history? Well, we got a whole lot. We got ways of engaging in modes of resilience and resistance, but the sources of that resilience and resistance in the face of the dominant tendencies of the history of our species, which is suffering, social misery, with unaccountable elites at the top. Whoever they are, kings, queens, monarchs, suzerains, corporate elites, patriarchs, haters of Jews, Muslims, Arabs, Black folk, indigenous folk, gays, lesbians, trans, Palestinians, whatever group you want who fits that bill of degraded other, Spanish speaking and so forth. What do we have as countervailing forces and figures and movements? Well, here it is. You see, oh, lo and behold, almost every major culture that we know, people come up with various forms of love rooted in those moans and groans and guttural cries connected to us at that grave. That we cry at the grave because we love our mamas. We love our daddies. And the question is whether that kind of love can broaden and deepen and expand, and whether that kind of love can also be a love of truth, a love of beauty, a love of goodness, and for those of us who are religious, a love of the holy. Now, all of those loves can be thoroughly bastardized and used in very ugly and vicious ways. just like love a family can. You can love your family, hate somebody else's family, and so forth and so on. But you've got a hook. And once you got that hook, and that's what Fico was talking about. Once you got that hook, that love, you say, okay, now let's see what we can do with this starting point of love. I mean, I've been blessed to teach in prison for 37 years. When I go in to see my dear brothers, first question I raise is, how many of y'all would take a bullet for your mama? They all raise their hand. 99% of them, I say, okay, I'm in the right crowd. I'm in the right crowd. Okay, we on the love train. We got a little Isley Brothers caravan of love up in here. You take a bullet, that means you got something you connected to bigger than your narrow narcissistic ego. It's something bigger than your selfishness. It's something bigger than your isolated individualism. You know that there's something outside of you that in connecting with you can give you a deep joy, not just a cheap pleasure. And you see, the arts, not in the abstract, but in particular fleshifications and concrete examples of art, is one of the ways in which it gets us outside of ourselves. And the best of ritual will do that as well, you see, to create those moments of kairos and chronos, meaning infused moments in everyday routinized life that keeps you in motion. As Curtis Mayfield, keep on pushing. That's kinetic. So you got kairos, you got kinesis, then you got kenosis, Kenosis, which is what all the great artists do. They put everything on the line. They empty themselves. What is Rembrandt but kenosis on the canvas? We go see that Return of the Prodigal Son. He has put everything inside of himself on that campus in the same way that Sarah Vaughan does, in the same way James Brown does, in the same way Chopin did. Now it's mediated with a master, with a tremendous mastery of craft and technique. And by master, we don't mean dominating. We mean they're surrendering to the subject matter, but bringing their own intelligence and feeling to it such that you get certain form and style and structures. But it's still a giving of self, an opening of self, a donating of self. And that's exactly what I think Shelley had in mind when he said poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And by poets, he didn't mean versifiers. He meant all of those artists who use imagination and empathy to create alternative worlds and realities to the nightmares worlds of domination and dogma and death that we find ourselves. This is not escapism. This is alternative projection by means of courage, imagination, empathy. And religions, therefore, are inextricably tied to poetry. I mean, the book of Job was one of the greatest moments of world poetry, for example. One of the saddest, one of the grimmest, especially if you cut off some of those last chapters. You see. But the poetry itself helps us engage the unflinching look at the dimness and the darkness, but not to allow the grimness and the darkness to have the last word.
That's incredible, and it sounds to me like what you're saying is institutions need to have that. They need to place that poetry, that metaphysical sense of poetry, above the elitism that we often cloak ourselves in. And I wonder if you could talk to I mean, my goodness, Harvard, Princeton, Union Theological Seminary. If anybody has a right to say they're an elitist, you do, but you're so generous. And can you talk about elitism and how we root it out of ourselves, or if you think we should, or how do we define elitism, and how do we take ourselves off our own perch? And because it's really easy to be a musician and think you're the center of the world. I can vouch for that. I can vouch for that. But I want to get out of myself, and I want you to help us, and I want you to help our students and understand that how we step outside of ourselves is the very first rung on that ladder.
Well, see, that's why, I mean, all forms of education have to do with the formation of attention, the cultivation of a critical consciousness, and the maturation of a loving soul. Now, all three of those processes, and I know we won't have time to get into all the dynamics of each one, but when you're attending to the things that matter as opposed to a superficial things, then you know that there's something at stake here that lures you and it's bigger than you. And when you muster a critical consciousness, it means that you have to have a certain acknowledgement of what came before. So there's certain high levels of excellence that came before that inform your attempt to be excellent. And then the maturation, the benchmark of maturation is humility.
Well, who determines what that canon is? That's kind of, we talked about this once before. Who
Absolutely.
who determines what that canon is?
But you got to have those things in place before you even have a conversation about who determines the canon. Because this is not going to be just a matter of acts of power. It's not going to be just a matter of acts of preference. But if somebody is serious about truth and beauty, then you recognize that it not only comes in so many contexts and so many forms, but no culture or small set of cultures can have a monopoly on it. Wow. So that the only way you can justify mechanisms of exclusion of other peoples or genders or classes, right, is a certain arrogance or a certain unwillingness to want to pursue the truth. Now, we have to look at different forms of elitism, though, because see, elitism is a very, very complicated word. In other ways, a very simple word, because elitism in American culture is associated right away with arrogance, condescension, haughtiness, and so forth. Now, all that's got to go. That's spiritual immaturity. That's spiritual immaturity, you see. But if elitism means that you're going to play the piano better than me, that's a fact.
I didn't see that coming.
Toni Morrison is going to write a novel better than both of us. That's a fact, unless you got some secrets I don't know about. You tell me about your novel writing. I can tell you about mine right now. You know, I worked with Toni Morrison for 22 years. So that there's different rankings. You know, I mean, Sarah Vaughan sounds better than Jody Watley. You see what I mean? We love Jody Watley. I listen to her music and stuff. She knows she ain't Sarah Vaughan, Aretha, or Mahalia, or Carmen McRae, or Ella Fitzgerald. Or Barbara Streisand, you see, so that, and all of that's not just subjective preference. It has to do with a certain maturation, formation, cultivation. See, Monk on the piano is going to be different than the third-year student at the Herb Alpert School of Music. Now, if somebody run around and tell them that they Thelonious Monk, they lying to them, they're going to have a nervous breakdown, because when they get into Monk's music, they're going to say, I can't do nothing like this. No, you can't. You got to do your own thing, but you just third year. Monk been at this for a long time. So that's a ranking. That ranking is inescapable. You see, the ranking is inescapable. I mean, it's just, there's no way we can't have degrees and gradations of excellence. But when the ranking is based on skin color, territory, class, gender, and so forth, then you've got the vicious form of elitism that has little to do with the more robust quest for truth and beauty and goodness. You see the point I'm making?
I do indeed. And it's funny. It's funny you should address this, because I think one of the questions in academia, especially in musical academia, is what happened to the rest of the world? What happened to the rest of rhythms? How do we define the complete musician? The musician of the future, the musician who is informed by African rhythmic code as his or she is by European harmony. And so what you're addressing is right to us, right to the point. Is excellence the ability to sequester yourself in a particular style or school or aesthetic, or is excellence the willingness to be open to all of it? And how do we take our theory and our musical knowledge to a bigger place? That's a question I'd love to ask you.
Because see, the humility and the genuine quest for creating powerful, beautiful things that help banishing and disappearing creatures like we humans. in space and time to deal with the catastrophes coming our way. And that's one of the fundamental aims of art, this tremendous magnitude of impact on somebody's heart, mind, and soul. I mean, Rilke calls it changing lives. Well, I mean, that's a little bit too evangelical for some artists, but it's true. It's true, right? Dante can change your life. August Wilson can change your life. Celia Cruz can change your life. Just listen close. You know what I mean? Your father, Chico, Dizzy Gillespie. These are great artists. They can change your life. They can help sustain your life. They can unsettle you so that you grow and mature and so forth, right? So that what we have is we have to say, okay, when we look at the history of universities in the United States and in Europe, we do understand that they emerged at a time in which the age of Europe was predominant. The nations between the Ural Mountains and the Atlantic Ocean dominated most of the world with empires and imperial powers and so forth. And so they had their great artists. Every civilization has its great artists. So we're not going to deny Beethoven and Bach and Virginia Woolf and Kafka and Shakespeare and Goethe and Hegel and others, right? But it's still within a certain cultural matrix. And when many of them looked outside of that culture, Hegel looked at Africa and said, what? Africa has no history. Okay, Hegel, get off the crack pipe, brother. Get off the crack pipe. You got some fascinating insights when you're talking about the Greeks and the Germans. When it comes to Africans, you just another ignorant so-and-so. But that doesn't mean that Hegel didn't have anything to say. It just means that he doesn't see broad enough. And in the end, what great art really tries to get us to do is to see things more clearly and deeply, to feel things more profoundly, and then to act more courageously and compassionately. That's not didactic art. Great art in general is dealing with those moans and groans and what it means to be human in space and time, no matter what culture you're in. You can be in Japan, you can be in Korea, you can be in Kenya, you can be in Guatemala, you can be in Haiti, you can be in Tel Aviv, you can be on the West Bank. What brings all those folk together is they're featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creatures born between urine and feces, and their bodies will one day be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms.
You talking about the funk.
We talking about the funk. We talking about the common denominator, the humando, But there's no humando without bodies and flesh. There's a wonderful book by my dear brother John Hamilton called The Philology of the Flesh. He's one of the great philologists of studies of language and so forth. And he's a musician too. He had a little group called Tiny Lights. They don't play anymore, but they put out 7 albums. It's some fascinating stuff. Look, kind of punk folk and stuff. Before You Let Go and so on. No, not Frankie Beverly, Before You Let Go, but they version, Before You Let Go. I don't want to confuse and conflate things here, though. But what I'm saying is that given the depths of hatred, contempt, domination, oppression in our world, given the multi-layered catastrophes, ecological catastrophe, possible nuclear catastrophe, especially with the neo-fascist gangsters' finger on the button in the American empire, Trump, and then the other gangster in the Russian empire, Putin. They both got their fingers on the button if they want. So that doesn't make you feel good at night. You know what I mean? Because they both, not clear they got both paddles in the water, and they certainly don't have enough love and commitment to justice. But there's other catastrophes too, spiritual, moral, political, economic. And in the face of those catastrophes, somehow we've got to muster enough courage, fortitude in order to sustain the best of our cultures and our civilizations, which must always be multi-racial when we talk about solidarity, and transnational when we talk about its openness. that openness that you were talking about, my brother.
Yeah.
And the openness is not some kind of little, milk toast liberal tolerance. You know what I mean? Oh, they're doing some interesting things on the chocolate side of town. Interesting. It's like a little smorgasbord. Let's just go check it out and have a little taste.
The
No,
exoticization of other
those human
cultures.
beings over there are as precious as the human beings in Beethoven's day, and they have created certain structures of meaning and feeling that we can learn from. And they've got some artists who can generate some sound and some paintings on canvases that one can learn from. You see,
Of
so as
course.
grand as Rembrandt is, Rembrandt would be one of the first to know from Netherlands. I can learn something from the others too.
Of course. Like Debussy, who was involved in listening to all kinds of music from all over the world.
Absolutely. Charlie Parker.
Yeah. Learned man.
We won't even get to
Incredibly
Coltrane. We won't
knowledgeable
even get
and
to Coltrane.
understanding of.
Coltrane listening Jewish Kabbalah music. He's listening to music from India, of course, Africa, rooted in the Black church, tied into jazz, also European music. He's a human being. He's got a humanness project in the deepest sense of humanness, not the way in which that term has often been colonized in contemporary discourses.
I know that this is we can't really ignore the. I wonder if you would help us understand and frame the events of these past few days. I know that a lot of people hurting. I know I'm I'm hurting. I'm just hurting by what we saw. And I know there are students out there and professors and staff and people who just need you to frame this in a way that will help us understand it, because it's a moment in history that I never saw coming, and we all understand that was coming. But
Yes,
help
that's true.
give us a moment of assurance and hope, and tell us, frame this moment for us a little bit, Dr. West, if you would.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we begin, where so many artists begin, which is let us try to examine the dark corners of our own souls and connect that investigation to the investigation of the dark forces in the world, in our society, in our own communities. So that the first thing is you're going to need strength to do that. So we should never be surprised by evil or paralyzed by despair. See, you got to be fortified perennially, no matter what the circumstances, from the death of loved ones to fascists, from vicious forms of domestic violence to anti-Jewish, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, ugly anti-Black, anti-Spanish speaking or brown realities. That's the world in which we live. Now, for people who are just so surprised, oh my God, you mean that there could be violence in the White House and white people can be violent? If there's been a lot of Black folk there, a lot of folks say, well, Black folk would probably be more likely. And of course, we know if Black folk had gone in there, it'd been a massive massacre in a second. They'd be chasing Black folk down in Idaho, New Mexico. Every Black person would be on trial for the next 2 weeks. How come y'all did that? Hey, I didn't know him. How come you did that? Hey, they never consulted me. But that's what it is to be part of a white supremacist culture where the action of one slice of your community is viewed as an action of the whole community, right? So we say, no, we're going to be blues men. Blues men, blues women is a spiritual / moral condition to the degree to which you are fortified to look catastrophe in the face. Because the blues ain't nothing but catastrophe lyrically expressed. Nobody loves me but my mama, and she might be driving too. That's the king of the blues. That's B.B. King. That's the B-side of The Thrill Is Gone. And we know The Thrill wasn't gone for B.B. It wasn't gone till he died. That brother was what should I say? All the way live. Let me put it that way. B.B. remained. I just traveled with him on his bus. But what does that mean? It means then that I've been down so long that down don't worry me no more.
Mm.
It's going to be difficult for any kind of catastrophe to completely disenable me, to completely flatten me out, to
Mm.
completely render me such a victim of despair and despondency that I can no longer move, that I can no longer laugh, I can no longer love, I can no longer create. And that's the attitude we have to have. But then we look up, we say, oh, well, let's see. What is going on in 2021 with Confederate flags? What's going on
Mm.
with neo-Nazis taking over the U.S. Capitol? What is going on when 58% of white brothers, 53% of white sisters, 1 out of 3 Latinos, 1 out of 3 Asians, 1 out of 3 Jews vote for a neo-fascist gangster? When 28% of precious queer folk voted for Trump? What's happening in our culture, in an empire in which people feel as if this is the only alternative? And it's here where neoliberal rule has to take some responsibility, not all of it, but some of it. Because the contempt that so many fellow citizens have for neoliberal elites, for professionals, for the money classes, for the chattering classes who are associated with what? Arrogance, condescension, calling the others deplorables, acting as if they are part of the cult of the smart. You know, this wonderful new book by Frederick DeBoer, The Cult of the Smart, as if they're the only ones who have a monopoly on intelligence, and the ones who don't have monopoly on intelligence and the degree makes them less than. And the tyranny of merit that Michael Sandel has written about with such insight, as if the only way in which we can gain access to our deep humanity is to have a degree and to be credentialized and smart. Well, you only got 32% of Americans go to college. 68% don't. So you mean they just get left out, not just in terms of access to goods and services, but in access to identities and status too? No, they human beings like anybody else, like anybody else. And so what has happened is there has been a deeply white supremacist, but also a more broadly cultural backlash against neoliberal elites. So you have a crisis of legitimacy. People don't view the New York Times and Harvard and the New Yorker with the same legitimacy because they've been associated with too much arrogance and even hypocrisy. And yet it takes a right wing and often a neo-fascist swing in the backlash. So it could take a progressive swing, as we tried to do with Brother Bernie. You see, because a lot of the folk, you know, we were there with Bernie. It was clear that, you know, they had a certain contempt toward the neoliberal elites too, because they have been the ones talking about the earth is flat, globalization is going to help everybody, that poor and working people need to get on the bandwagon with these international trade deals that somehow is going to lift everybody up the ladder. It didn't turn out that way. See, the wealth inequality broadened, the wage stagnation intensified, and the cultural and psychic collapse of families and communities made it more difficult for poor and working people of whatever color to be able to gain access to what is required to live lives of decency in our society. And that's just predatory capitalist culture just running them up. What Martin Luther King called the survival of the slickest, with the financialization of a capitalist project in which people make billions and billions of dollars just making deals and not producing any products. And they can stay in that silo. They can stay in that very, very narrow context their whole lives and don't realize the degree to which poverty is intensifying, especially among the most vulnerable, which is children. You see, that working people are now dealing with the gig economy with hardly any benefits, that the university itself is undergoing commodification with adjuncts and so forth and so on, you see. And so what has happened is, I mean, you see this amongst some of those folk there marching yesterday, is that they're looking for a way out because the neoliberal center cannot hold, to kind of revise William Butler Yeats here, and things fall apart. And the only alternative that they see is a right-wing, xenophobic, authoritarian, populist, in some ways neo-fascist alternative to that neoliberal center. And unfortunately, a progressive version of populism like Brother Bernie, which got crushed by the neoliberal centrists of Obama, Pelosi, Biden, Harris, and so, but they all came together, Pete, Amy, they all came together. They said, no, anybody but Bernie. How come anybody but Bernie? Bernie's going to critique of Wall Street. He knows all of that criminality that took place 2008, insider trading, market manipulation, fraudulent activities, predatory lending. How many of those gangsters went to jail? Not one.
Not one.
Let a precious Spanish-speaking brother in East Los Angeles get caught with drugs, or a poor black brother in South Central, or a poor white brother, a sister in Appalachia get caught with drugs. They going to jail, you see? So that the deep indignation, the rage, it's hard to sustain a democracy when that kind of rage escalates and you don't have moral and spiritual venues to channel that rage. If it's going to be hatred and revenge rather than love and justice, then you're in a world of trouble. That's why Brother Martin Luther King Jr., that's why Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, that's why Dorothy Day, that's why Edward Said and the others become very important, because they see the rage. They say, look, like Beethoven, we're going to look unflinchingly at the evils, at the domination, at the suffering, but we're still going to try to generate ways in which the response to that suffering can be one of a love of truth and beauty and goodness, broadly construed, that is humanistic, that is a solidarity across national borders, and in the end, integrity. That's why the 4 questions that we talked about with Du Bois. How does integrity face oppression? What does honesty do in the face of deception? What does decency do in the face of insult? What does virtue in the form of courage do in the face of brute force? That's Du Bois, 1957, The Ordeal of Mansart. And Du Bois says, look, these things cut across culture. It could be European, it could be African, it could be Asian, it could be indigenous people or whatever. Integrity, honesty, decency, kindness, love, sweetness, gentleness, that cuts all the way through. It cuts all the way through. And that's what we need today more than anything, even though many of us who talk this way, tend to be rather pushed through the margin.
It's interesting because obviously revolution comes to mind, and revolution is a strong word for many people, but the socioeconomic oppression you speak of, it seems to be pervasive, and even in the face of this brief moment of terror and hope, it seems to actually be the divide is getting deeper. The divide is getting deeper and deeper, and the people, and I think especially in this era of COVID, we see that the vast majority of people who have suffered during this era are people of color and in marginalized communities, and socioeconomic oppression has also had life and death consequences for this era. And so I want to ask you a very, very controversial question, and I definitely, yeah, right. Can you believe that? Because it seems like you speak of hope, and it there's a quasi, and this is where I first intersected with you, that the idea of you can be a revolutionary and a person of faith, or you can be a revolutionary and not a person of faith. But that's just, there's a metaphysical spirituality even that we don't want to deal with, that maybe has nothing to do with religion, but that equips us, and maybe has nothing to do with faith, but it equips us to deal with the ever looming large problem that it's not getting better. and that
Yes,
will make
yes.
us revolutionaries. And maybe you can address that.
Yeah.
In
No, but that's
beautiful.
such an important question, and it's a powerful question. It really is, because see, for me, see, when you're really talking about revolution, you're talking about a fundamental shift from one way of looking at the world, being in the world, to another way. So if you have a society that more and more is dominated by greed, hatred, and revenge, and we're talking about a society that ought to be dominated by fairness and justice and love, then that's that's the fundamental shift. I mean, Plato talks about this in the Republic in terms of the turning of the soul, the pedagogy that results from paideia, from the deep education, not the cheap schooling. We're not talking about just getting a skill, getting some information, and getting you a nice little job and living in the vanilla suburbs and trying to be locked into comfort and convenience. That's not education. That's just cheap schooling. So UCLA at its best has always been about paideia. You come in here to get transformed.
Yes, sir.
You come in here to have your transformation take place so you get a chance to focus on the things that matter, like truth and justice and love and beauty and so on, right? Now, that kind of revolution has political consequences. Because if you're talking about a critique of greed and you got a greedy corporate class, and not every one of them, but too many of them, you got a whole system that rewards greed with no accountability to the common good, then you're going to end up with a whole lot of folk with tremendous housing and all the homelessness there in the city. You're going to end up with folk who got all this food, but all the other folk ain't got nothing to eat. You're going to end up folk with the best education for the top few, and all the masses of these precious children don't even have books in their schools. You say, well, wait a minute, we need a revolution. Oh my God, they talking about violence. Oh my God, they talking about taking something like, no, we talking about something that has to do with decency and integrity, the golden rule. Now, I talk with Sonny Rollins, used to tell me all the time, Brother West, is just the golden rule. What would you want people to do if you were in that situation?
Baya.
This ain't no big metaphysical, philosophical apparatus you need to have.
Baya.
You see what I mean? And this is true. I mean, if you talk to white brothers and sisters, well, what do you think it would be like if you lived in a society of black supremacy in which you were enslaved for 244 years, and then for another 100 years you were lynched every 2.5 days? For 50 years you were lynched every 2.5 days, and then you finally got a chance to vote. It ended up with mass incarceration. It was black supremacy rather than white.
Dr. West, I'm
in that situation. You see what I mean? That's the golden rule. That's the golden rule, you see. So that in that sense, it's really a matter of implication. And let me just say this about being a Christian, though, brother, because as you know, I'm in love with a Palestinian Jew named Jesus, who comes out of a great prophetic tradition, building on the genius of Hebrew scripture. To be human is to spread hesed, loving kindness, steadfast love to the weak, the vulnerable, the orphan, the fatherless, the motherless. Right? Jesus goes into the temple, and that temple was the largest edifice east of Rome. They had major troops, they had banksters. It was where the chattering classes and the educated classes would spend time outside. And what does he do? He runs the money changers out, man. Now, this is almost like, Pentagon, Wall Street, White House, Harvard, UCLA, and Hollywood, all at the same time. Not as classes, but as those individuals in those classes who choose to be greedy. Because you can be part of a wealthy class and still be a decent human being if you make certain kind of choices. Because human beings always have the possibility to go another way, right? So you say, okay, now what does it mean to really be a follower of Jesus? Not in the narrow dogmatic sense, but in a moral and psychic sense. Well, you got Pontius Pilate. You see, you got a whole lot of folk who want to be followers of Jesus on Pontius Pilate's payroll. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard, brother. It's like, you're with Moses, but you're on Pharaoh's payroll. You're going to have some schizophrenic moments here. And by payroll, I don't mean just monetarily. I mean psychically. I mean spiritually. You living in the world of Pharaoh. You worshiping a golden calf in terms of the idolatry and not being concerned with the plight of poor enslaved people in those biblical scriptures, and these days with the analogs, you see. So that here it's not even a question of Christianity in the narrow sense, or Judaism in the narrow sense, or Islam in the narrow sense. And there's tremendous prophetic figures and possibilities in Judaism and Christianity and Islam. But we know too often all three of those religions have accommodated themselves in very, very ugly realities when it comes to domination, when it comes to revenge, when it comes to hatred and so forth. But that's true for every institution, not just religious institutions. You see, this has been true for every institution. We could tell the story of the history of UCLA. You know, I was there when we defended Sister Angela, you know what I mean? Right there in Josiah Royce Hall, you know what I mean? But you had Brother Kaplan, David Kaplan, and the others in the philosophy department stood with her. He decided to be a decent person. He decided to be a courageous person. He decided to be a visionary person in that regard. And so as you all wrestle with curriculum, just keep in mind that these larger contexts that we're talking about become important. They're historical, they're philosophical, they're psychic, they're moral, and for some of us, they're spiritual, which has to do with religious narratives. Now, I've got a lot of secular, atheistic, and agnostic brothers and sisters who don't like to talk too much about religious narratives. And that's fine. That's fine. You can get to love and beauty and truth a whole lot of different ways. A whole lot of different ways.
Sir. We just got a few minutes. I want to take a second and acknowledge that every time every time I spend time with you, it's transformative. And we just got 4 minutes, and I want to make sure that if anybody has a really burning question that they need to ask you, that we get to it. It's not really fair, but if anybody has a question, and they want to put it in the chat,
time. No, we can take as much time as you like for question and answer and call and response. Though, well,
there are people here, I'm sure, who would love to ask a question.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure what the mechanism is. If they have a Q&A, there's a Q&A. There's a Q&A section in your Zoom, and if anybody wants to ask a question, just put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A,
and they can just send it to you,
and they'll send it to me. Here's a question.
That's cool, because I don't know how to do that given my Neolithic self.
These are a couple of beautiful questions. What actions can academic institutions and departments take to respond to a lack of diversity within their faculty? What is your take on an anti-racist task force? What steps can a task force take to enact equity, diversity, and inclusion?
No, you got to be very serious about bringing in high-quality voices of Black people, of brown people, of indigenous people, of women. And you got to bring in high-quality voices of perspectives, you see. And what I mean by that is it's not just a matter of skin pigmentation, you see. It's the difference between, a John Brown and a Clarence Thomas, you know what I mean? That John Brown's love of Black people is so deep that if you have a John Brown-like figure in the academy who wants to be involved in a quest for truth with a deep openness and embrace of those people who have been excluded, then that white brother or that white sister has some important things to say. Clarence Thomas, I love Brother Clarence Thomas. He's a beautiful Black man, but it's also clear that he's got his own tilt and he's got his own orientation. His voice belongs in the conversation, because I believe in all voices. I'm coming from people who say lift every voice. So you have to have all voices in the conversation, you see. But it's not as if by bringing a Black person in that somehow you're going to get somebody who speaks for all Black people. In the same way, John Brown is not going to speak for all white folk. That's definitely the case. He probably had about 0.2% white support. Right? So if you're talking about quality voices, both in terms of who they are and in terms of what their perspectives are. And we never reduce education to indoctrination. No, just like you never reduce art to indoctrination. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about shattering the structures of learned ignorance. Learned ignorance. You see, you can be trained and educated within a certain framework that makes you think you're the most rigorous thinker around, and you don't even realize what the blind spots are. You don't even realize what the presuppositions are. You don't really want to take Socrates serious. Socrates said, I'm going to look at your basic assumptions. I'm going to look at your blind spots. I want to look at
dialogue.
Your myopia. The dialogue is going to shatter those, you see. So you have to have leaders in a university who are fundamentally committed to the mission, which is this quest for truth. And it's got to be fruit. It's got to be results. It's got to be concrete evidences that people are committed to this robust quest for truth.
Dr. West, can you comment to the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa massacre? That's one of the questions.
Is that one of the questions?
Yeah.
Wow, LA.
Yeah.
Lord. Well, I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was born.
I know that.
Yeah, same hospital as the Wilson brothers of the Gap Band, and that GAP, Greenwood, Archer, and Pine, who's named after Black Wall Street. That dropping a bomb in that song had something to do with that bomb that was dropped in 1921 on American citizens, on Black folk. But it just shows, again, very much like what we saw at the Capitol, that the white supremacy is very much alive and well. And it takes some of the most barbaric and monstrous forms. You would kill hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Black folk in 1921. And that even today, they'd walk around with Confederate flags in the U.S. Capitol and don't realize that flag, like the bombs dropped on Black folk in Tulsa in 1921, in many ways has elective affinities to the Nazi flag, has elective affinities to the Belgians' atrocities in Africa, in the Congo, has elective affinities to the way Dalit people are treated, Roma people are treated, elective affinities to the way Muslims have been viciously demonized, the way gays and lesbians and others have been viciously dehumanized. All of these are various forms of evil. And white supremacy, of course, has been one of the major ones. But you see, even in the States, you see white supremacy gets truncated. You got folk running around all the time. The original sin of America was slavery. No, indigenous peoples. Tell the truth. You don't eliminate their suffering just to make something fashionable for your diversity class. You got to tell the truth about when they got here. They had to first engage the precious folk who are already here. And they received white supremacist vicious treatment, genocidal effects of attack and disease and so forth. Then there's enslavement of precious Africans. Then there's the subjugation of workers across the board, and the domination of the women, and the dehumanization of the gays and lesbians and others. And this is not putting anybody down. It's just telling truths. It's not anti-American. It's anti-injustice in the making of America. There's always been people in America who have fought these things, and they are just as American as cherry pie. Martin Luther King Jr. is just as American as the Ku Klux Klan, but both of them are as American as apple pie. Jazz is as American as what we saw yesterday.
Yeah.
And people think, oh, absolutely. That's not American at all. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
It's just the worst of America.
That's right. That's right.
Martin Luther King Jr., he's American to the core. He is the best of America. Rabbi Heschel, he's the best of America. He got here much later. He didn't get here till March 1940. Martin Luther King Jr. was about 11th generation, coming out of slavery and Jim Crow. But they all American. But the question of what the best and the worst is has to do with what kind of choices you make, what kind of life you live, what kind of vision you enact and embody.
Yes, sir.
That's 100 years we should never, ever forget. We should never, ever forget anybody's domination, oppression, attack, and assault.
That leads me to a beautiful question here, which I think a lot of us have. As musicians and scholars during these times, what is our duty or responsibility during these times? And it kind of ties in beautifully to another question, which is what power do we have? How do we help to change the world if we're not in positions of power? Because, I play the piano, but I'm not. What I'm saying, when there's a lot of these questions have that same as musicians, as scholars, as people who are not in positions of power. How do we change the world?
Well, I mean, when Shelley says poets are the hierophants of unapprehended inspiration, the mirrors of the shadows of the future cast on the present. Political and economic power are not the only forms of power. And a general will tell you in a minute, they can have the best military equipment in the world, but if the spirit of the soldiers is weak, they can still go under. There are different kinds of power in the world. The artist does not have military power unless somehow they're hanging out with the Pentagon or something. No, the artist has artistic power. And that's a mighty power, but it's not a power that can change things in any immediate way for the most part. I mean, Uncle Tom's Cabin had tremendous impact. That was a book that had it in that regard, Zoloft's essay on Dreyfus in the newspaper, he was an artist. He had tremendous struggle in terms of trying to come to terms with anti-Jewish hatred in France at that time. Tolstoy, tremendous power, political as well as, but most artists have artistic power. We say, well, what is artistic power? Here we go again. Artistic power begins with yourself. You got to find out who you are. I used to talk with Prince about this all the time. We travel already. He said, Brother West, people kind of hard on me now because I'm Jehovah's Witness and they listen to Love Sexy and all that other stuff. And now I'm into this. Larry Graham to talk me to go this way. I said, brother, you are a great artist in process. You see, you got to be true to yourself. But Beethoven's not going to write Opus 131 in his 20s. He's going to write that right before he dies and can't hear a mumbling sound. He's writing something else in his 20s. Everybody goes through stages. You got to be true to who you are, given the stages that you go through in light of the crisis in your own life, and recognize that who you are still puts you in the midst of political, economic, and social realities, even as you got your own personal realities. So if Marvin Gaye wants to talk about what's going on and let's get it on within a year and a half, he's just being true to himself. One's going to be social commentary. The other going to be, how am I dealing with my erotic desires in light of the crisis that I'm coming to terms with? You say, Marvin, you a free man. That's what an artist is. A free woman. Come to terms with who you are, but then recognize that you are also coming to terms with certain political and economic realities in addition to your psychic, personal, familial, and even spiritual realities.
You're talking about where we began.
And just listen to your album. I mean, people listen and say, look, Brother Arturo, he got it all going on. You got it all going
on. Inspired by you. Inspired by W.E. Du Bois. Inspired by my friends and colleagues and the people that I love and work with. Absolutely. A lot of words are coming forth of just appreciation, Dr. West. I just going to read you, just thank you, Dr. West. I work with community college students and my own internal struggles that I contend with is bringing our communities together in institutions that effectively and efficiently and successfully moves transfer students to graduate school. I mean, there are people just here who are just thanking you and loving you, and it's just beautiful to look through these comments. You can look at them as well, but I don't want to take a lot more of your time, and I know that that we're gonna have more opportunities to meet with you. This is the first of many of these speaker series, and Still Waiting is the speaker series kind of axiom, and it means our ancestors fought for a moment better than this, and our response to that moment is ours. It's our choice. It's what we do. It's how we work as musicians and scholars, and how we listen to the voices of spirit guides like yourself. And when we come together to really face our humanity, as you say, as institutions, to face the real task of being human, knowing that we have a finite amount of time, the urgency then becomes more real. And I can't even begin to tell you how much I learned from you, from my colleagues, from my students especially, about the urgency and the need for today to change my life at this very second, at this very moment. So I just want to take that opportunity to thank you, Dr. West, for just enlightening all of us and giving us so much hope.
Oh, thank you, my brother. We are prisoners of hope in the best sense, and that's not optimism, that's not pessimism. Hope is a verb as much as a virtue.
It's an active verb.
It's an active
It's an
verb.
active verb.
Curtis Mayfield said you got to keep on pushing. Remember that line that Curtis Mayfield wrote for Gene Chandler in the song Just Be True? He said, I've given you all of me and plan to give even more. Babe.
Oh, you starting now. You starting something.
He gonna give his whole self and plans to give even more. That's the great artist. Oh, mm-hmm. That's what I'm talking about. You see how the black and the white don't work all together because he got the resonance too, brother. Good God. Yes. Brother Arturo. Little Kairos moment. What you gonna do with time in time? We don't have to just wait for Samuel Becker's waiting for Godot with Dee Dee.
I think we got to do another record and another one.
We got to get back in the studio because when we were there in Birdland, man. Well, of course, I mean the Apollo was beyond.
Yeah, that was sacred, man. That was sacred. We had a big choir too. Remember we had a choir.
We had the choir. The
at
crowd
the People's Performing Arts Center. That was one of the proudest moments of my life. To be up there with you and to
be there with you and your band, man.
Truth.
Your sun blowing. Oh my God.
I'm gonna close with this so the folks can understand. Musicians are heroes to me, and they lead really difficult lives. They spend the equivalent of a doctorate playing scales and hopefully getting work. And the climb is hard, I can tell you, and a lot of my students, the climb is hard. But I looked out, and you were dealing with the hymn at the end. Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Oh, yeah.
And you were, that's the end of this week that I wrote, and you were speaking and talking about the sacrifices of Martin Luther King and Michael Brown and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. You didn't even know they hadn't sacrificed themselves yet. And I looked over and my musicians were in tears. And you brought so much meaning to them. You gave them license to cry and to feel deeply. And that's a moment I'll cherish for the rest of my life. Thank you, Dr.
No, it's a beautiful thing. You know, one of the things that ought to inspire artists is that Socrates himself never wrote a word, never shed a tear. And when he's in prison, you might remember that voice that he would always hear to say, argue, Socrates. At the very end, it says, practice the arts, practice music. And he writes a hymn to Apollo. Yes, and he versifies Aesop's fables. He says, maybe I should have been an artist the whole time. Maybe, in fact, argument has its role in place, but vision and stories and narratives and tropes and metaphors and sound and melodies and rhythms and harmonies, maybe that's what I should have done. And you remember Plato bans the flute in the Republic because the flute is going to touch on some sides of the soul that might render folk too critical of the hierarchical society he is creating. But when Plato dies, he's got a flute under his pillow. And he asked the Thracian girl to play the flute as he's dying. And she says, I can't get the rhythm. And he takes his finger and he just beats. And you say, you can't escape the arts. You can't escape the music, even those great philosophical figures going back to the beginnings of Greece. tied to Northern Africa, tied to the Middle East, tied to the Mediterranean. The music, the poetry is interwoven with the science, the philosophy, a good life, a virtuous life, a courageous life, a life worth living, and in the end, a life of a love supreme. Coltrane
That's
got
it.
some tears, brother.
Love supreme. Love supreme.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. West. Thank you.
Love you, though, brother.
Love you, brother. Love you so much. Everyone, take care of yourselves. Be safe. Wear your masks. Don't goof up. Take care of each other. Love each other. We're going to be back. We have Philip Ewell, a bunch, Simon Woods, and we'll see you soon.